about me, I played a little bit of sports, just a little bit. And one of the things about playing sports is you learn a lot about what needs to take place in your mind in order to prepare your mind for said activities. It's a kind of mental exertion that takes place before a physical exertion. Did anybody else in the room play any sports growing up? Or maybe watch sports? I mean, everybody was glued to the TV during the Olympics, right? Like at least that. We got Olympics coming up this summer too, and I'm getting pretty excited just thinking about it, but y'all don't seem excited, so I'm like, maybe wrong crowd. But I recognize that there's folks in the room that probably don't care about a ball or a puck, a cleat, maybe even feet, right? Like y'all just, sports is just not your thing. But sports pops up in Paul's illustrations all the time throughout the Gospels, all the time throughout his epistles, all the time Paul is referring back to sports. And so it's not me wanting to come up here and talk about sports today. It's Paul saying, we're going to talk about sports. So if you've listened to Olga read earlier, you heard Paul in 1 Corinthians chapter 9, verse 24, which we'll read again here in a second, talk about this analogy. He talked about how the athletic mind can be one that can inform us, one that can be used as an illustration for how we understand the Christian life. But, from one athlete to maybe even another, we do all recognize that there's a difference between some athletes and other athletes. Like all athletes ain't created the same, if you will. Like there's a difference between me and LeBron James. Very small difference, very small difference. But there is a difference. Like there's a difference between LeBron and maybe Michael Jordan. There's a difference between Serena and Maria. There's a difference. If you're a football fan, there's a difference between Tom Brady and Tim Tebow. Very big difference. But there's something about athletes that make them all the same, yet separates them from everybody else. And it's that athletic attitude that they possess. So in this brief moment of encouragement, Paul uses that attitude. He highlights the mind of the athlete as an analogy and as an example, as an illustration for how we can live out our Christian lives missionally. Let's look at 1 Corinthians chapter 9 together. And I'm going to read from the CSB today. It might be a little bit different than the Bibles that are in your chairs. It will be on the screen directly as I'm reading. But if we pick up in verse 24, Paul says, "Don't you know that the runners in the stadium all run the race, but only one receives the prize? So run in such a way to win the prize. Now, everyone who competes exercises self-control in everything. They do it to receive a perishable crown, but we an imperishable crown. So I don't run like one who runs aimlessly or box like one who's beating the air. Instead, I discipline my body and I bring it under strict control so that after preaching to others, I myself will not be disqualified." If we're going to take Paul's message in full stride here, then it's helpful to understand the context that went before this. Pastor Dave's done a brilliant job preaching throughout 1 Corinthians, and last time we were talking about this, we were talking about giving up our rights, right? And so in the earlier verses that Paul has pinned down, we see a lot of this missional language, giving up things to accomplish said goal. Sounds very athletic, if you ask me. So if we're going to take his message in stride, then what we see him talking about is his intent that this analogy would be one that we can use to help us center our minds around a goal, and that goal is missional. Look at verse 12 for a second. If you're looking through your Bible, I'm talking about verse 12 of 1 Corinthians 9. Paul says, "But we endure anything rather than put an obstacle in the way of the gospel of Christ." Verse 19, "Though I am free from all, I've made myself a servant from all, that I might win more more of them. Verse 22, to the weak I became weak, that I might win the weak. I become all things to all people by all means that I might save some. Verse 23, he's doing this thing about giving up something for the sake of the goal, for the sake of the prize, for the sake of the mission, for the sake of the ministry. And even verse 23 says, I do it all for the sake of the gospel, that I may share with them in its blessings. So that's the framework that Paul's given us to understand what he's talking about as he's talking about running this race. So if these previous verses explain to us what Paul did, then our subject text for this morning gives us a great explanation of how Paul did it, going back to the athletic attitude. And in this athletic attitude, like in all athletes, you find at least three things. The athletic attitude consists of task performance with effort, by discipline, and for a reward. So if you're talking to any pro athlete or any semi-pro athletes, they are doing something with effort. They're being disciplined in that, and they're doing it for a reward. So let's look at effort for a moment. Effort. The difference between me, you, and every other professional athlete who's performing their thing right now for millions of dollars is that they're putting effort in. We go and watch them. We go and sit in the stands. They're on the floor doing the hard work, putting in the effort. And here you got Paul. He's talking to us like we are the athletes, which comes with an expectation of effort. So the encouragement from Paul right here in this effort concept is that we got to get out of the stands, right? There's a lot of work being done down here on the field, on the track, in the pool, in the rink. We got to get down there and be a part of that. So by God's grace, right, he has selected us to be a part of his team. He doesn't draft like the other guys, right? Like it's not based on our abilities, gifts, talents, and all of that. He chooses us because he wants us. What a beautiful picture of God's grace and his goodness. He chose us because he wants us. And his wanting of you is not purposeless just because it's not based on what you can do for him. Instead, his wanting you is based on his purposes for you and purposes that you will fulfill through his divine skill set. That's him. That's how he chooses. And in his choosing, we have all gone from stadium sitters to sprinters. So we all got to run. Like Paul said in verse 24, he says, do you not know that the runners, we the runners, but he says the runners in the stadium all race. Now some of us, all of us race. He says, but only one receives a prize, so run in such way that you receive a prize. Now, Paul's not actually saying that only one of us is going to be rewarded in our Christian efforts. Paul is utilizing this picture of when they ran in the Olympics and when they ran in the Isthmian Games, which is pretty much what Paul's referring to. This is a separate set of games during like the Olympic circle back then in ancient Greek, where it was every other year, so that's 2 years, right? Every 2 years. Yeah, every 2 years where they would get together, they get all the best athletes. They have been training for months and months and months. They had to say an oath like, I have actually been doing this hard work to be ready for this moment. And then they get out there and they would all run a race, but only one of them would win. So Paul is not saying to us in our Christian race that only one of us is going to receive the prize. What he's saying is all of our effort should match what the athletes who win that race's effort is at minimum. So we got to run, family. There's a popular saying if you watch any of the NBA playoffs right now. Anybody? Just a few of us. We should all get together and watch some finals. All right? It'll be a whopping 6 people in there. But One thing that you might hear said often on ESPN if you watch sports highlights is shooters shoot. And that is to say that, look, this guy is made for this. He trained, he executes, he is the perfect form, he won't miss many shots, so we should give him the ball because he's set up well to do this. Shooters shoot. But in the same way, y'all, runners run. We run. And by run, I mean we live out our faith by evangelizing. And not a single one of us gets to sit around and observe because Christianity is not a spectator sport. The Christian life is not effortless. It's not. And I'll clarify by letting you know that our salvation is based on God's efforts alone, not ours. However, what it does produce in us is our effort to influence the other sitters in the stadium to come join the team. Our salvation produces this evangelistic mind, this action-oriented faith that we live out. Perhaps one of the good questions we can ask ourselves is, in this action-oriented faith, what kind of effort are we putting in to reach the sitters? What kind of effort are we doing down here to reach those who observe? A more simpler way to ask that question is, do we have meaningful relationships with non-believers? If not, then maybe we could start there. Like, I'm sure that we can all think about at least one person right now who we are not sure where they are with Jesus. I'm sure we can all think of one person in our life. Maybe it's at work. Maybe we pass by them often on our daily commute. Whatever it might be. You see this person at the register, at Dollar General, whatever it could be. It could be a single name that comes to your mind right now. And maybe if you don't have that name, I'll probably pray that the Lord can reveal that name to you by the time we conclude. So what do you do once you get that name in your head? What do you do with that? What effort do we put in there? We got some youngers in the room, so I'll quote Frozen 2 by saying, you do the next right thing. It's a dope song, by the way. Check it out. What it could mean for us is that we take the next step in the relationship. What's the next right step in the relationship? If you've been, going here and there to this person, giving them the hey, giving them that, perhaps it could be an introduction. You might not even know their name. They might not even know your name. Maybe they're convinced that you don't care because you haven't asked their name. What would be the next right step, the next right thing? Say, hey, I'm such and such. Nice to meet you. You can call me such and such. What's your name? That's the next right step. That's the next right thing. That takes a little effort. If it didn't, you would have already done that. We would have already done that. Perhaps you're past the introduction aspect of it, and maybe y'all know each other by name, but you never had a meaningful conversation. What could it look like to instigate a meaningful conversation? Hey, what we've been working together for quite some time, and I'm always impressed by what you do. But what's your story? How'd you become who you are today? How'd you get here? What brought you to where you are right now? Maybe it's taking a step into a meaningful conversation that might be your next step. Or an invitation, perhaps to come from job or from school to your home where you sit down and you talk even further about what you learned. That could be your next step. Or if you've been doing that for quite some time and y'all have talked about everything around the sun except for your faith, maybe your next step is to ask if you have permission to speak into their life. It could be some things that you have observed about them that they need the hope of the gospel, and maybe you've grown enough trust with them that they would be delighted to hear you share the hope that lies in you. Y'all, this is not us just running like middle school track stars run. This is us running with the kind of first place effort to win an Olympic game. This is us running, like Paul says, in such way to win the prize. See, Paul depicts this first place effort very well when he talks about how he is running. Paul said in earlier verses, I became all things in order to win them. All things to all people. Paul's like, I'll hang up my comforts. I'll hang up what I've been freely given. I'll hang all of that up if I can step into a situation where I'm able to win you. Paul said, I forsake my rights so they don't become an obstacle for the gospel. Pastor Dave broke that down so beautifully. Go back and listen to that. You can hear a lot more about what Paul says. He's putting in first place effort. He's becoming whatever he needs in order to secure the reward. This reminds me, so I played college football, right? And this reminds me of a time when I was a sophomore in college, and all the new freshmen come in, and they want to take the sophomores' spots, right? So they come in, and the sophomores are like, I'm just trying to make it through practice. It's hot out here. I'm ready to go home. I'm hungry, right? And I'm going through the motions, but the freshmen's got the eyes on the prize. The freshmen are, I'm going to win a starting spot. They're going to have my name in lights. I'm going to put my name in the magazine. I'm going to have my name on the back of my jersey. Everybody's going to know about me right after I take this sophomore spot. And there's a young freshman, I'm not going to say his name. I don't want to put him on blast. He might watch this later. But let's call him Sam. Sam, you know who you are. You're probably laughing. Sam, what he would do is coach would say, all right, y'all, we got drills. I need a blocker. And Sam would run to the front of the line past the seniors, the juniors, and the sophomores. Sam didn't care nothing about learning what he needed to learn. Sam jumped right in front of the line. And Sam was a decent blocker, so it was all right, but Sam was skipping everybody in line to get the reps. But then next thing you know, coach is like, all right, y'all, we're moving away from that. We need receivers right now. Guess who's jumping in front of the line? Sam. Now, Sam could hardly catch worth a lick. But Sam was willing to be a receiver because his eyes was on the prize. He knew, I need to get this starting spot, so I need to do whatever. I need to become whatever coach needs me to become. And if the on the field stuff wasn't bad enough, we go into a classroom where we do film study, where we watch our opponents and we're figuring out what in the world they're doing so that we can figure out how to counter it. And coach is asking direct questions to direct players. Like, Ryan, what does the running back do on this play? And Sam would say, coach, the running back, he goes this way, he goes that way, and he does that. And by the way, the guy getting the water, he's supposed to be standing over there because that's where we want our water placed at. Sam, now you're jumping in the front of the line to become a student. Sam had his eyes on the prize. He had this goal in mind that he was going to win the starting spot. And so Sam became everything that Sam needed to be with matchless effort. And it did work out for Sam. He did start that year. Sam put the effort in. Sam was willing to sacrifice. Sam was willing to make a fool of himself. Sam was willing to become all things in order to win. Does that sound like what Paul's talking about? Y'all, somebody is waiting for us to become like them in order to win them. And I recognize that that is not easy to hear. For example, if you're an extrovert in the room, that might look like toning down just a little bit in order to reach an introvert who might be nervous by your presence. But it works the other way around. Introverts, you're also called to win, to pursue, to model for extroverts what it looks like to know Jesus. And that might require you to turn up just a little bit. Don't go crazy, but just a little bit. Where you put yourself in position to be talked to by a bunch of folks, to be asked the hard questions and have to answer them. We exist in a cross-cultural space, so white folks in the room, while you don't have to become Eminem to reach black people, perhaps maybe it's a little more strategic to skip past the Seinfeld and the Friends quotes and move on to brush up a little bit on living single and your Martins and your good times. Like, I'm not saying you gotta be what you're not, but perhaps it's strategic to think in ways in which prepares you to reach other peoples. Black folks in the room, y'all think you're safe, but you ain't. Black folks in the room, we are no different. Now, we work with colleagues, with white brothers and sisters who might just want a few of us to learn a little something about their music. They might want you to walk down the empty streets on the boulevard of broken dreams with them. Or for my more seasoned saints, take a highway into the danger zone. It takes effort. All of us. It takes effort. And family, while I know like code switching has been dubbed as a necessary evil to survive in the States here, but if this sinfulness that conceived that reality did not exist, then could we imagine the beauty of the atmosphere that God could create with a people who are willing to become all things to all people? And it's not even just that hard. There's some youngins out here that need their aunties and their unks. There's some youngins out here. I remember when I was growing up and we would play with the water hose and we were jumping on, the neighbors' trampolines and we grabbed the tennis balls and the footballs, and guess who was still around? The more mature folks. Emphasis on more mature. They would grab a tennis ball, they grab a football, they throw, they play a little basketball, body us with the old man strength and all of that. But guess what? They were in position to teach us, to train us, to grow us and point us along our way. The youngest need the OGs. And you might not want to be classified as an OG, but guess what? We here now, baby. You got to embrace it. Not just the OGs, though. What about the seniors that are in homes that have seen their family members come and go and are just simply waiting for somebody that might not be in their age range to come with an old soul and sit down with them and converse and talk about the goodness of God and talk about the things that they remember and talk about things that bring them joy? What about those opportunities that go missing? Y'all friendless. They need friends. And putting out this kind of effort for the sake of the gospel, going to all people, to all nations, it's never a waste. It might feel weird, like the athletes do. It might feel uncomfortable when you put yourself in these positions to go past your comfort zones, but it can all be done to the glory of God. All of it. So we got to run your race with the kind of effort to win first place. In verse 25 and verse 27, Paul kind of observes the athletics of the day and the athletes, and he sees this actual godly tool of self-control utilized in the realm of sports. For example, verse 25, Paul says, "Now everyone who competes exercises self-control in everything." Skipping to verse 7, he says, "Instead, I discipline my body to bring it under strict control so that after preaching to others, I myself won't be disqualified." The athlete takes effort. The athlete takes discipline seriously. In sports, discipline is the most required skill to master. Discipline and self-control is actually not the effort that separates us from a lot of the professionals in the college level and some of our top-tier high school folks. It's not the effort, because all of us can go out there and just run as fast as we can, as hard as we can, and we're just not going to move as fast as they do. We're not going to jump as high as they do. But what it actually is that separates us from them is the discipline. They woke up at 5 in the morning to fuel their body, to stretch, to rehearse. They went to not McDonald's to eat their lunch. They went from there right to the ball field or the weight room before 6 a.m. And you like, how in the world they do all of that? And I'm rolling over to the other side of my pillow. Discipline. It's not just the discipline to prepare for the sport, it's also discipline within the sport. Because sometimes, if you watch a little bit of football, every so often you'll see guys get on this line and the quarterback will say hike or hut or whatever he says, Omaha, whatever your thing is. And you'll see nobody move on one side of the ball, but at least 6 guys will jump from the other side and they'll get this big old yellow flag thing, which means there's a penalty on the play, which means you're now being penalized not for your effort because you were ready to go get them. You're being penalized because you're disciplined. You were supposed to watch the ball. It's this discipline. The discipline is what separates those from who are standing on the sideline and those who are actually on the field sprinting. It's the discipline that separates those coming in 4th place and those coming in 1st. In verse 25, Paul kind of alludes to this, but like I was saying, in the preparation and in the competition, these athletes, they discipline themselves. And what I mean by that, they suffer in every area of life to perform the small task of 45 minutes of their game. If you play soccer, maybe it's 82 minutes. If you are a track star, sometimes it's 11 seconds. Your whole entire life has been altered. You're suffering. You're dieting, saying no to things that look so good. You're saying no to the, oh man, y'all going out. Y'all going to have to catch me after the game. I want to go, but I got to get my 8 hours of sleep so I can be in my proper performance window. Oh, I got to turn off the Netflix. I can't binge the 3rd episode of the hour, right? Like I can't do all the things that I want to do. This hurts. I got to go to the weight room. I don't like lifting, but guess what? I got to be disciplined. In this kind of discipline for these athletes, they're doing it all for the reward. And sometimes it's not even the reward. Sometimes it's the opportunity for the reward because they don't always win. So Paul is telling us that this kind of agony that they'll put themselves through, we ought to put ourselves through as well to be disciplined for our Christian race. They make a habit of putting their body through misery and saying necessary no's in order to cultivate the mentality that says, I can make my body do the unimaginable in my sport. Likewise, as runners, not standers, not sitters, not spectators, but as runners on Team Christ, we too should discipline ourselves. Paul knows, y'all. He knows that he is permitted to do just about anything that's not sinful that he can do. He knows he's got the permission to do so, but he gladly says no so that he can make sure that everything he's doing is in line with the missional purpose. He's trying to run this race in such way to get a reward. 1 Corinthians 10 is a great picture of what Paul is doing. 1 Corinthians 10 tells us that everything is permissible. This is Paul's words in later chapters that we'll be studying here soon. He says, but not everything is beneficial. Everything is permissible, but not everything builds up. He's trying to do only the things that'll build up. So maybe there's some things in our life that we ought to ask ourselves, what is permissible in our life that if we shave that off, we would be better witnesses for the gospel? What are some things that are okay or good that we might shave off to accomplish the great and to be about the things of God? A few that we always got to make mention of in these states is our comfort, our preferences, maybe it's tradition, or even language. A few things, just a few, that are permissible, but might not be serving the missional purpose. Like athletes, disciplined Christians say no to good things and yes to great things so that they can accomplish God things. And that's one of the reasons why I think like fasting is such a beneficial spiritual discipline. Because like in fasting, you're saying no to your body's very loud yelling of, I want this, I want that. Don't you hear me? Respond to me now. You're saying no to those things so that you can tune your ears to the still small voice of God. You're saying no to good things so you can say yes to God things. And don't get me wrong, Jesus hinted on the necessity of us having self-denial in his own words in Luke chapter 9, verse 23. He said that if we wanted to follow him, we must first deny ourselves. See, folks, it takes effort, but it's not nearly about our effort. It's about the Spirit of God living inside of us that empowers us to say yes to Jesus. And as he empowers us to conform to our new nature in Christ, what we can see is that self-denial, the more self-denial that we practice, the better position we can be as one of God's instruments. God's got plans for you during your day. It's about time we recognize that. But so does your body. Your body's got plans for you as well. Perhaps it's 10 more minutes of sleep. That turns into an hour and 10 minutes and you're late, right? Your body could be saying, like, I'm too sore to go on that prayer walk with my brother and sister that I know needs it. The body oftentimes says things like, I'm too anxious to put myself in Christian community. I'm too anxious to go a step further and put myself in an unbelieving community where I can share Jesus. Sometimes the body says, I'm too hot, or I'm too tired to hear the word of the Lord or to come worship on a Sunday morning. Sometimes the body is too hungry to love my neighbor as myself. We get hangry instead, snappy. And all those things, y'all, the other side of it is that those things aren't actually bad. Like it's not bad to sleep. Resting is a gift from God. It's not bad to eat. Somebody shout hallelujah. Food is a good thing. It's not bad to want to recover before you go and exert more physical activity. But for the athlete who's going to win the prize, they have made their body an instrument, whipped it into shape, enslaved it to the goal. It's tough, but discipline is necessary. Because Christianity, like I said earlier, is not a spectator sport, and it's definitely not a sideline sport. Every area of our life can be used to the glory of God. Nothing needs to remain on the sideline. Every area of our life. He didn't make us runners just so that we can come out of the stand and stretch on the sideline, right? Like, he didn't make us runners just so we can stand over there and quote scriptures and not get in the ring to box. He didn't make us runners and make us, worship on a Sunday morning. Like some of us, we got every Christian song memorized like Hamilton. But we're not even in the room that matters. We're not even in the room where it happens. We're not even putting the energy and effort in to do what runners do, like the shooters do. So y'all, we got to run, but we got to run disciplined. We can't run aimlessly. And we got to run in our lanes, not someone else's. Paul hints at a couple things in this passage, and I'm getting ready to wrap. Paul hints at how in the Isthmian Games, within their stadium, there was normally a target that they placed off in the distance so that athletes could line themselves up with and focus all their energy running towards that. If not I don't know if y'all ever seen kids run, but they start running sideways and they end up in the other lane. So this thing was quite like the lanes that we have in track. But they would do so that all energy, effort is headed in the right direction. And also, what Paul is hinting at with this whole disqualification thing is also aligned with what he knew about the Isthmian Games. For example, there's two ways you get disqualified back then. As if you didn't train for months and you come up to the table and it's like, yep, I'm here, but I didn't train. Nope, you're not qualified to run this race. You didn't put the work in. You're not actually doing the thing. The other way is if you didn't finish the race. So maybe you got a little tired and you're like, all right, I got to go sit down somewhere, right? You didn't finish the race. So what Paul's actually telling us about disqualification is not that he's in some way losing salvation, because that is not the case. Paul makes it very clear that you can't lose salvation. What Paul is actually saying is, I'm not going to just be a coach. I'm not going to tell y'all what to do and not do it. I'm not going to be a hypocrite. What Paul is saying is not me. I'm going to practice what I preach. And he does. For example, in 2 Timothy chapter 4, verse 7, at the end of Paul's life, he says, I have fought the good fight. Not just told people how to fight and told people to go fight. He says, I've finished the race. Not just stayed on the sideline stretching and quoting scriptures. He says, and I kept the faith. There is reserved for me a crown of righteousness, which the Lord, the righteous judge, will give me on that day, not only to me, but all those who have loved his appearing. Paul's not willing to just talk about it. He's willing to be about it because the reward is great. Paul talks about in verse 26 how they were running to get a perishable crown, but how we run to get an imperishable one. Like, that is also hinting at the Isthmian Games. Y'all, do you know that those folks were trained for months, and if they won, what was being put on their head was the equivalent of a ring of celery? That's what you're going to give me after I've just, disciplined myself for a whole year for this? Celery or pine? You're going to put some salad on my head? That's not it, brother. Perishable. Sometimes that probably wouldn't even last a whole week. Perishable. But the athletes suffer because they believe that the prize is greater than the pain. They are willing to put it all on the line because they believe the prize, and for them it was probably more than just the salary, but the glory was greater than their pain. And so the athletes today, we suffer because we believe the prize is greater than the pain. Their pain, their prize, temporary. But ours, like Paul says, is imperishable. It's imperishable. It can't even be compared. Like the prize versus pain doesn't even compute in Paul's mind. Like, look at what he says in Romans chapter 8:18. He says, I reckon that the suffering that we must endure in this present time isn't worthy to be compared to the glory that will be revealed to us later. It's not able to compute. It just doesn't. But in this thought, Paul is certain that the treasures that we have stored up for us in heaven when we run this race, the treasures that we have stored up for us are the ones that Jesus said is where the thieves and the moths can't get in and steal or destroy it. The treasures that we store that are stored up for us in heaven is like the ones that Jesus said we get treasures even when we give somebody a cup or glass of water in his name. The treasures that we get in heaven is an imperishable crown. And Paul's not talking about his personal admittance into the kingdom of heaven. He's not talking about personal salvation. But what he is talking about, because you don't earn that salvation, what he is talking about is helping others to experience it by introducing them to Jesus. And that is one of the most rewarding and perishable gifts that an athlete could ever get. Not the ribbon and the trophy, But when somebody younger than you says, you know, I started playing because I saw you play. I wear this number because you wore that number. And then next thing you know, they get older and they become great. And then the next person looks at them and says, you know what? I did this because I saw you do it. And I did this. And then next thing you know, you have a downline of athletes that are influenced to become athletes because of one person. Do you know that you could be that? You can run your race so well, with so much effort and so much discipline, that folks that won't even meet you will come to know Jesus because you influenced somebody that influenced them, that influenced them, that influenced them. What moves people from the stands to sprinters is a visual stimulation. And we know this to be true because that's why so many cookbooks exist. And that's why you got 12 of them at your house. You see the picture, you're like, I'm going to try that. That's why a lot of us are on Pinterest, scrolling through, trying to figure out what can we do to this wall right here. A lot of us graduated YouTube University, and we figured out how to do auto mechanics just in our garage, and we figured out all these things. When somebody shows you and they model it well, you feel encouraged like you can do that too. I believe that Paul has this in mind when he's telling us to run our race and running our race missionally, because the prize is so great. Somebody in heaven, because of how the Lord used you, that's an imperishable gift. That's a greater reward. That's better than all these things. That's definitely better than the salary you had. It's so worth it. So much worth it that we would put ourselves through pain and discomfort and all the things because we want to make sure that people experience Jesus. And the crazy thing about this is Jesus did that too. The athletes suffer because they believe the prize is greater than the pain. Hear how Hebrews talks about Jesus. Hebrews tells us that therefore, since we also have such a large crowd of witnesses surrounding us, let us lay aside every hindrance and sin that so easily ensnares us. Let us run with endurance the race that has been lying before us, and keeping our eyes on Jesus, the pioneer and the perfecter of our faith. For the joy laid before him, he endured the cross, despising the shame, and sat down at the right hand of the throne of God. The joy that lay before him was you. Was him restoring the entire world. Was him restoring you. The joy, his reward, his imperishable reward. It's you. And he went through all kinds of pain on the cross for your behalf because he knew that the prize was greater than the pain. So we run like him. Let everyone in this room today who has not accepted what Jesus did in his race on their behalf. Scripture says that he came, he died, and he rose for you. And we exist in this room today as reminders of what he did for you. In a way, we're running this race as well for you. Because we want to be the visual stimulation that draws folks to the only hope that can truly save. Let's pray.